Its banners touched the edge of the known world, its laws shaped the very meaning of civilization. But power, like the setting sun, cannot shine forever. Every empire rises with a promise of glory, and falls beneath the weight of its own perfection. So let the world fall quiet around you. Let your eyes grow heavy. And as night deepens, drift with me through the corridors of time, back to the dawn of the Roman Empire, when the city of 7 hills first awoke to the sound of destiny. If these words bring you calm, let this channel stay by your side, a quiet companion through the nights, where history whispers and dreams remember. In that year, Gaius Octavius, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, stood before the Senate. He was only 36 years old, calm, composed, almost too still for a man who had just conquered the world. The marble pillars around him shimmered in the light, their shadows long and patient. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, carrying the confidence of someone who no longer needed to shout to be obeyed. The senators listened, tired men who had seen too much blood. And then, in that sacred hall, they did something the Republic had sworn never to do. They gave one man absolute power. They called him Augustus. And Rome, weary, wounded, but still proud, called him Hope. Outside, in the narrow streets of the Subura, children played among the stones. Bakers lifted warm loaves from their ovens. Somewhere, a poet named Virgil was writing lines that would outlive them all: Rome, the empire without end. It was not just a city anymore. It was an idea, a heartbeat, a vision carried by millions who would never see its walls but would live under its shadow. For the first time in generations, peace had a name: Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It began quietly, not with fanfare, but with the stillness that follows exhaustion. Augustus set to work not as a conqueror, but as an architect of order. He rebuilt temples, restored roads, and rewove the frayed fabric of the empire. Marble replaced brick, law replaced chaos, and Rome began to believe in itself again. Imagine it, the sound of chisels ringing across the Palatine Hill as artisans carved the faces of gods into white stone. The soft murmur of fountains fed by new aqueducts. The steady march of legionaries who, for once, were not going to war but returning home. Rome was healing, one column, one heartbeat, one prayer at a time. Augustus ruled not only with might, but with illusion. He never called himself king, he spoke as if the Republic still lived. The Senate still met, the people still cheered, but all decisions flowed from him like water returning to the sea. Power, in his hands, was quiet, not shouted, but felt. Like gravity. At night, when torches flickered across the Tiber, Augustus would walk through the gardens of his villa. The air was warm, filled with the scent of myrtle and pine. He would stop to look at the stars and think of his adoptive father, Julius Caesar, now worshipped as a god. The weight of destiny hung upon his shoulders, heavy and unseen. He had inherited not just an empire, but a dream, and dreams, he knew, were fragile things. Meanwhile, across the empire's vast lands, the world was changing. In Egypt, still shimmering from the fall of Cleopatra, Roman soldiers guarded the Nile, their armor reflecting the desert sun. In Gaul, the forests whispered of rebellion but fell silent under the rhythm of Roman order. In the east, merchants carried silk and spice through dusty roads that led, inevitably, back to Rome, the heart that pulled all veins of the world toward itself. And yet, in the quiet triumph of peace, shadows lingered. The old families of the Republic watched Augustus with wary eyes. They smiled in the Senate, but their loyalty was born more of fear than faith. Some whispered that Rome had traded freedom for comfort, that liberty had died beneath the calm hand of a single man. But the people did not care. They had bread, festivals, and safety. They had peace. Years passed like verses in a poem. Rome grew brighter, cleaner, grander. Augustus commissioned monuments that touched the clouds, the Aerae Passes, the altar of peace, carved in marble so pure it seemed to glow even in the night. Each carving told the story of Rome's renewal, families united, harvests abundant, the gods smiling once more. In 2 BC, the Senate named him Pater Patri, Father of the Nation. His image appeared on coins across the world, from the sands of Syria to the shores of Spain. And in every corner, people spoke his name as if it were a prayer. But beneath the surface, time was moving, slow and inevitable. Augustus had restored peace, but he had also built a system that depended on him alone. What would happen, whispered some, when the father of the nation was gone? Could Rome's peace survive without its architect? In his later years, Augustus became quieter. The lines around his eyes deepened. He spent more time in the countryside, far from the noise of the forum. His wife, Livia, wise and calculating, kept the court steady. His stepson, Tiberius, waited in the wings, patient, cold, and unreadable. On a late summer evening in 14 AD, in the town of Nola near Naples, Augustus lay dying. The air was heavy with the scent of figs and dust. Those who stood near his bed said his last words were gentle, almost like a whisper. "Have I played my part well? Then applaud as I exit." Outside, the cicadas hummed in the olive trees. And somewhere in Rome, a torch was lit, the first light of a new emperor, and the slow, almost invisible beginning of decline. For now, though, the city slept beneath the calm of its golden age. Its marble shone under the moonlight. The empire breathed, vast and beautiful. And the night carried on, silent, serene, eternal. Guarded horizons that glimmered with every color of the world. Tiberius ruled with calculation rather than charm. He trusted few and loved fewer. Where Augustus had inspired, Tiberius inspected. His reign brought efficiency, but not warmth. In the narrow streets of Rome, gossip spread faster than fire. In 37 AD, his death on the island of Capri was met not with mourning, but with a sigh of relief. Power shifted again, as it always did, from hand to trembling hand. And then, the city trembled under laughter and fear alike, for Caligula took the throne. He was young, radiant, adored, the great-grandson of Augustus, the little soldier's boot. But madness moves quietly before it reveals itself. Soon, Caligula's charm curdled into cruelty. He built golden bridges for his horse, ordered statues of himself as a god, and turned Rome into a theater of nightmare. The same people who once cheered his name now prayed in whispers for deliverance. It came, in the year 41 AD, with the whisper of a dagger in the Senate's shadows. From that chaos rose Claudius, the scholar emperor, hesitant, limping, stammering, yet wise beyond the mockery he endured. Under his reign, the empire expanded once more. In 43 AD, Roman legions marched into Britannia, planting standards deep in its green and misty soil. Cities grew, aqueducts rose, and law began to outlast the sword. Claudius ruled with the mind, not the spectacle. He dreamed not of gods, but of governance. Yet in 54 AD, poison found its way to his lips, and the empire turned its gaze to a boy king. Nero. A name that would echo through centuries like the crackle of fire. In the beginning, his rule was golden. The young emperor loved music, poetry, and performance. Rome adored him. But art, in Nero's hands, became obsession, and obsession, destruction. In 64 AD, flames devoured the city. For 9 days, Rome burned beneath a sky of smoke and ash. The streets that once rang with laughter became rivers of ember and ruin. When the fire died, Nero blamed the Christians, and their persecution began. He built his golden house upon the ashes, a palace so vast and shimmering it seemed to mock the heavens themselves. But power built on fear cannot stand. By 68 AD, revolt spread like wildfire. Nero fled the city that no longer loved him. Alone, trembling, he ended his life with the whispered words, "What an artist dies in me." The year that followed would be remembered as the year of the 4 emperors. 4 men rose, and 4 men fell, each claiming the empire, each losing it in turn. Until at last, in 69 AD, a soldier from humble origins claimed the throne. His name was Vespasian. Vespasian was not born of marble or myth. He was of the earth, practical, steady, patient. Under him, Rome healed again. The Colosseum began to rise from the heart of the city, its stone arches reaching toward eternity. When it opened in 80 AD, his son Titus dedicated it with 100 days of games. Beneath the roar of the crowd and the scent of dust and sweat, the empire celebrated itself, its power, its scale, its immortality. But every echo fades. After Titus came Domitian, proud, suspicious, cruel. His reign ended as so many had before, in blood and betrayal. Yet the empire stood. It always stood. For beyond the walls of the Palatine, Rome had become too vast to fall to one man's madness. Then came an age of light, a time the historians would call the era of the 5 good emperors. From Nerva to Trajan, from Hadrian to Antoninus Pius, and finally to Marcus Aurelius, Rome flourished as never before. Roads reached the edges of the world. The Pantheon rose, its dome a mirror of the heavens. The empire hummed with art and order, its frontiers guarded by legions who knew discipline as devotion. Under Trajan, 98 to 117 AD, Rome reached its greatest extent, stretching from the sands of Arabia to the highlands of Scotland. Under Hadrian, 117 to 138 AD, the empire paused to breathe. He built walls, not wars, most famously, the one that still bears his name in northern Britain, holding back the endless mist. Under Marcus Aurelius, 161 to 180 AD, the philosopher-emperor, Rome learned the wisdom of impermanence. He fought wars along the Danube, yet wrote of peace in his heart. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Imagine him now, in his tent beside the cold northern frontier. A candle flickering, his breath visible in the winter air. His words soft as prayer while the empire around him stands at its peak. But even at the summit of greatness, the air grows thin. The legions were tired. The treasury stretched thin. And as Marcus Aurelius gazed across his vast, glittering empire, he must have known that everything which rises so perfectly must, one day, begin to fall. Striking down men whose deaths were scripted long before they entered the sand. Rome, which once worshipped discipline, now applauded madness. The senators watched in silence. The soldiers grew restless. And one winter night, in 192 AD, as torches flickered in the corridors of the imperial palace, Commodus was strangled in his bath. The whisper of silk rope marked the end of peace, and the beginning of chaos. What followed was a storm that would last for a century. They called it the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 193 and 284 AD, the Roman Empire became a sea without horizon, emperors rising and falling like waves, 26 in less than 100 years. Some ruled for months, others for mere days. Assassins decided history more often than generals did. In the year 193, Rome saw 3 emperors within a single spring. Pertinax, noble and disciplined, was slain by his own guards. Didius Julianus, who bought the throne in a public auction, lasted only weeks before his blood darkened the marble steps. And then came Septimius Severus, stern, commanding, a soldier's emperor. He marched on Rome with legions at his back, reclaiming the capital through steel and fear. Under his rule, the empire found brief stability. But stability in Rome had become a candle in the wind. When Severus died in 211 AD, his sons Caracalla and Geta divided the throne, and each other's throats. Caracalla murdered his brother and washed the empire in suspicion. He expanded citizenship across all free men in the empire, a move of brilliance and desperation both, and then, in 217 AD, fell to an assassin's blade on a lonely road near Carrhae. 4 decades afterward, the empire became a revolving door of soldiers and schemes. The frontiers quaked beneath barbarian invasions. In the east, the Sassanid Persians under King Shapur I struck deep into Roman lands, capturing cities, humbling legions. In 260 AD, Emperor Valerian marched to defend his realm, only to be taken alive by Shapur. Legend says the Persian king used him as a human footstool before his court. The humiliation spread through Rome like a fever. While emperors died in distant fields, the provinces began to break away. In Gaul, generals carved their own empires. In the east, Palmyra rose like a desert jewel under Queen Zenobia, a woman of unmatched brilliance and pride. She ruled from the sands of Syria to the banks of the Nile, her banners fluttering against Rome's fading shadow. For a moment, it seemed the empire itself would dissolve, not through invasion, but through forgetting what it was. And yet, against all odds, Rome's heart kept beating. In 270 AD, a new emperor emerged, Aurelian. They called him Restitutor Orbis, the restorer of the world. He was a soldier of iron and silence, his will sharp as his sword. In a few short years, he reconquered the lost provinces, defeated Zenobia, and bound the empire together once more. The roads echoed with victory again, the standards of Rome fluttered like they had in ages past. But Aurelian's triumph was brief. In 275 AD, his own men, deceived by rumor, struck him down. The restorer of the world lay dead in the dust of his own camp. After him came emperors who were emperors in name only, fleeting, forgotten, ghosts wearing crowns of sand. The empire shrank. Its borders bled. Its coffers emptied. The once golden city of Rome began to fade, its marble cracking, its statues weathering beneath the rain. And then, in 284 AD, as the sun set crimson over the Bosphorus, a man of discipline and design rose from the east, Diocletian. He was not born of nobility. He was a soldier, a pragmatist, a survivor. He understood what Rome had become, too vast for one man to rule, too fragile for chaos to continue. He would reshape it, divide it, save it, if only for a while. That night, as the empire shivered between death and rebirth, the winds whispered through the halls of power. That Rome would never again be whole. Thus, desperate for order. Diocletian was no dreamer. He was an architect of control. He looked upon the vast Roman world, from the misty shores of Britannia to the golden sands of Egypt, and saw what others could not. No single man could hold it anymore. So, in 293 AD, he made a choice that would echo through centuries. He divided power. He called it the Tetrarchy, the rule of four. 2 Augusti, 2 Caesars. He ruled the east, while his trusted general Maximian ruled the west. Beneath them, 2 junior emperors were trained to follow, Galerius and Constantius Chlorus. Together, they governed an empire no longer centered in Rome but stretched like a constellation across the lands, each city a star in a greater design. Order returned. Borders were strengthened. The economy, long fractured, began to heal under new reforms. Diocletian's laws touched every corner of life, prices, taxes, even faith. But control came with cost. He demanded uniformity, obedience, and reverence for the old gods. When Christians refused, he saw their defiance as a threat to unity. In 303 AD, the Great Persecution began. Churches burned, scriptures destroyed, believers hunted. It was Rome's last desperate attempt to silence a faith that was quietly shaping its future. Diocletian's reign, though iron-bound, brought stability. But power wears down even the strongest hands. In 305 AD, after 20 years, Diocletian did something no emperor before him had ever done. He stepped down. He returned to his palace in Split, on the Dalmatian coast, and spent his final years tending to gardens of cabbage, saying, "If you saw the vegetables I grow, you'd never ask me to return to power." It was as if the empire itself had taken a long breath before the next storm. Because in the vacuum he left, ambition began to bloom. In 306 AD, in the city of Eboracum, modern-day York, England, Constantius Chlorus died. And that night, his son, Constantine, was hailed emperor by the legions. Tall, sharp-eyed, and unyielding, Constantine would become the most transformative ruler since Augustus. But his rise would not be gentle. 4 years, Rome became a chessboard of power, rival emperors, shifting alliances, armies clashing beneath crimson skies. By 312 AD, Constantine stood before the walls of Rome, facing his greatest enemy, Maxentius. As night fell before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine looked to the heavens and saw a sign, a cross of light, with the words, "In hoc signo vinces." In this sign, you shall conquer. The next morning, he painted that symbol upon his soldiers' shields. And when the battle ended, Rome belonged to him. In 313 AD, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting freedom of worship across the empire. The Christian faith, once hunted, now walked openly beneath the sun. Churches rose where temples had stood. The world was turning, slowly, irreversibly. But Constantine's greatest vision was not of faith alone, it was of geography. He looked eastward, to a land where trade, culture, and power met beneath the meeting skies of Europe and Asia. And there, upon the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, he began to build a new capital. He called it Nova Roma, New Rome, though the world would remember it by another name, Constantinople. When it was dedicated on May 11, 330 AD, the empire shifted on its axis. The center of Rome's world was no longer Rome itself. As the century drew toward its close, the empire stood divided, not in borders, but in soul. Old gods faded into silence, new prayers filled the air. Marble crumbled, mosaics glimmered. The Latin tongue shared space with Greek hymns. Rome had become two empires now, Western and Eastern, two halves of one weary heart. And through it all, the shadow of its greatness lingered, like the glow that lingers after sunset, warm, faint, and hauntingly beautiful. By 395 AD, Emperor Theodosius I, the last ruler of a united Rome, took his final breath. He left behind two sons, Honorius in the west, Arcadius in the east. Two crowns. Two capitals. Two destinies. And the whisper of the old world began to fade beneath the hymns of a new one. Though chipped and weathered, the Colosseum still loomed, though silent and weary. Rome was not yet gone, but it had begun to dream of its own past. In the winter of 401 AD, dark shapes began to move beyond the frozen rivers of the north, the Visigoths, led by their warrior king, Alaric. He had once served Rome, fought beneath her banners, and learned her ways. But Rome had forgotten her promises to him, as she had to so many of her allies. Now, he marched not as a servant, but as a reckoning. 4 years, Alaric's forces swept across Italy, like a cold wind breaking through the Alps. In 410 AD, they reached the gates of Rome itself. For 800 years, the city had stood untouched, invincible, eternal. But on the night of August 24, 410 AD, under a sky heavy with ash, the gates were opened. The Visigoths entered. They did not burn everything, but what they took was far deeper. They took the illusion of eternity. The cry of Rome's people rose into the dark like a prayer unanswered. Gold was stolen, temples looted, and sacred places violated. Saint Jerome, writing from distant Bethlehem, wept, "The city which took the whole world is itself taken." When Alaric left, Rome still stood, but it was a shell of itself. The Senate met in silence. The people fled to the countryside. The empire's once mighty legions were now mercenaries, men fighting not for Rome, but for gold, for bread, for survival. And beyond the Alps, new forces gathered, tribes the Romans once called barbarians, now nations of their own, the Vandals, Franks, Goths, and Huns. They pressed upon Rome's borders like the tide against old stone. In 455 AD, the Vandals came, swift and merciless. Led by King Genseric, they sailed across the Mediterranean and entered the weakened city. This time, even the name of mercy was lost. For 2 weeks, Rome was stripped bare, her treasures carried away to Carthage, her memory scattered to the wind. When they departed, even the word vandal would forever mean destruction. By now, emperors rose and fell like shadows. Valentinian III was slain. Petronius Maximus ruled for 70 days before being torn apart by a mob. The empire was ruled not by Rome, but by generals and strangers, men of the sword rather than the Senate. And then, in the east, the storm no wall could stop, the Huns, led by Attila. His armies swept through the Balkans, burned cities, and demanded tribute from emperors who no longer ruled. In 452 AD, he turned his eyes toward Rome. But when he reached the river Po, he was met not by legions, but by faith. Pope Leo I rode out to meet him, alone, unarmed, beneath the blazing Italian sun. No one knows what words passed between them, but Attila turned back. The eternal city was spared one final time, not by sword, but by spirit. Yet mercy could not hold back time. In 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire breathed its last. A Germanic general named Odoacer marched into Ravenna, deposed the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus, and sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople. The message was simple: the West no longer needed an emperor. The Roman Empire, as the world had known it, was gone. The sun that had risen in the days of Augustus Caesar now set over broken stones and quiet fields. But even as the empire fell, its soul did not vanish. Rome lived on, in language, in law, in the quiet pulse of civilization itself. Her roads became the paths of pilgrims. Her temples became churches. Her dream, of order, of beauty, of endurance, outlasted the swords that destroyed her. Tonight, if you walk among her ruins, you can still feel it. The marble is cool beneath your fingers, the air thick with centuries. And if you listen closely, beneath the sound of the wind and the hum of the city beyond, you can almost hear the faint echo of footsteps, the murmur of the Senate, the rustle of togas in the dawn light. The empire may have fallen, but its heartbeat still trembles through the ages. And so, as the night settles over Rome's sleeping stones, remember this: nothing truly eternal ever dies. It simply changes shape, and waits to be remembered. If these whispers bring you peace tonight, let this channel stay by your side. A quiet companion through the dreams of history, where empires rise, and time itself falls softly back to sleep.